Happy New Year and welcome back to Bring It In with Morgan Campbell. I'm your host, Morgan Campbell. Going to be joined in a second by the best panel in this business. We're coming to you with a special edition the day after 52 arrests and counting and 4 fatalities after what could best be described as a mob of Donald Trump supporters stormed the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Now, this happened just after Raphael Warnock defeated Kelly Loeffler in a Senate runoff election in Georgia. And it happened just before a group of a few dozen Republican Congress members planned to protest the certification of the federal election results that made Joe Biden president. And all three of these events have their tentacles in the sports world, and we have our panel here to help us all make sense of that. Dave Zirin, sports editor of The Nation, is in Washington, D.C., as is Canada's own Meghan McPeak. Now, Meghan, you were on your way out to get some chocolate when something happened yesterday. Tell us about what happened on the street in D.C. where you live.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I was about to go, get some chocolate. Everybody loves some chocolate when you've got a sweet tooth craving, and a stream. I counted at least 20 MPD cruisers, not just rolling past me, they were flying past me, sirens blazing. And in that moment, I said the chocolate can wait, turned around because I had a gut feeling that something was happening. Lo and behold, when I turned my TV on, we all have seen and witnessed what transpired in the nation's capital on Wednesday, and it was surreal, but at the same time not shocking or surprising at all, given what the past 4.5 years have been like. The fan has been, they've been fanning the flame, and we saw what that has caused.
Right, and now, Dave, what was it like? You're a longtime resident of Washington, D.C. What was this scene like for you?
Deeply, deeply, deeply upsetting. And to be clear, what was upsetting about it was not that they were invading this citadel of democracy, because you only get so far with that with me, because, I know the business they do in there, and it doesn't always have a lot to do with democracy. What upsets me so much is that, DC is not just the capital. It's not just the political center of the world or what have you. It's the place that Duke Ellington, Frederick Douglass, and Marvin Gaye called home. It's Howard University. It's Hilda Mason. It's Dorothy Height. The idea that Nazis could march into our town, and they were Nazis. I mean, there were Nazi flags, there were Confederate flags. This was white nationalist scum. And the idea that they could march into our town and rampage consequence-free, that's the bitterest pill of all. The part that's also bitter is that they were able to do this, and the police officers, a lot of them are opening the barricades for them. They're taking selfies with them. So one of the repercussions that needs to come out of this is we need to look at how the police are operating in this city when it comes to white protesters, white nationalist protesters, and when it comes to people who protest in this city all the time. I mean, I've seen timid protests here that have had more arrests than the ones in DC. It's something like 52, 53 arrests have taken place since yesterday. 76 people were arrested after the Lakers won the championship. I mean, hundreds of people were arrested in DC after George Floyd was murdered. And it's just the ways in which these thugs were treated yesterday. That also was a very bitter pill, living here and knowing that this is the backdrop, and knowing, that these are the people who are put here to protect and serve. And it's like KRS once said, you were put here to protect us, but who protects us from you? The actions of the police have crawling inside my mind in a way that, yesterday, it's indelible. It's like a scar, their actions.
Well, absolutely. And as of this morning, it's 52 arrests, but one of the numbers that jumped out to a lot of us over the last 12 to 16 hours was how long the number of arrests just hovered at 13.
Yep.
Like you can arrest 13 people for jaywalking if you feel like it, storming a federal building on camera. And this is the thing too, because we're doing this in the social media era. So nobody's doing this without evidence. People record themselves doing this, and all you can kind of come up with is 13 arrests, which was
Morgan,
They were recording themselves, Morgan.
Absolutely.
They were recording. You can see video evidence. We were watching it live of these. Let's be clear. You can call them thugs. You can call them for whatever reason. I don't know why you would ever call them protesters. They were thugs, and they were, in my opinion, domestic terrorists with a plan to try and overturn and overtopple the federal building and democracy. They were thugs. They were recording themselves as this was happening. Let's be very clear. If they were Black, brown, indigenous, or any other minority in this world, they would not have gotten past the first barricade before a bullet was shot. Point blank, period.
Absolutely.
They made it onto the steps.
And this was one of the first reactions, one of the first sentiments expressed by a lot of pro athletes on social media as this was happening. Jarvis Landry, Doc Rivers, Draymond Green, on down the line. Again, was the level of privilege and comfort afforded this mob of people who were literally trying to overthrow the government. And so what we've seen in DC since then is a canceled college basketball game. I think it was George Washington U versus UMass. But the pro sports world just kind of kept on rolling. But there were some, not protests, but demonstrations, right? The Raptors and the Suns linked arms. The Celtics and the Heat took a knee during the national anthem. The Bucks, who were the Bucks playing last night? The Bucks and the Pistons after tip-off took a knee. But Dave, how do events like yesterday square with the athlete activism we've seen, and where is this all headed?
Well, it squares with the athlete activism because athletes now feel that they have not just a platform, but a responsibility. Mm-hmm. That wine is out of the bottle. They feel like they have become civic leaders. And in a lot of ways, athletes have filled the vacuum for members of Congress who have not been leading on these issues, who have not been leading for the people that they're supposed to represent. And athletes have stepped into that void, that cultural void, to talk about right and wrong, to talk about morality. I mean, Jaylen Brown yesterday, did a whole press conference where he said, and I quote, "It reminds me of what Dr. King said. There's two split different Americas. In one America, you get killed by sleeping in your car, selling cigarettes, or playing in your backyard. In another America, you get to storm the Capitol and no tear gas and no massive arrests." And it's so wild that if you look at the statement put out by the Boston Celtics about why they were going to take a knee and leave the floor and then come back, it doesn't start with what happened at the Capitol. It starts with the police officer who shot Jacob Blake 7 times in the back, which happened is not going to be prosecuted. And that was news earlier this week. And it only now feels like 6 months ago. Right. I mean, it's like, and then there was a statement at the end about what happened at the Capitol, but it read like that was added on, like, whoa, this isn't just about Jacob Blake today. There are other issues happening as well. And it just goes to show you that, for athletes, and particularly super conscious ones like Jaylen Brown, like the people in the WNBA, I mean, it shows that, that they feel a sense of obligation to be a voice for the voiceless, because Congress is not doing that job.
Yeah, okay, and you brought up 2 points, Dave. First is that when you read the statement from the Boston Celtics, it starts to become clear the difference too between when athletes and people who have grown up, either as Black men in America, Black men in places who wind up in places like America, or even like the Steve Kerrs, who are just really staunch allies. But how the message changes once you go from protest to demonstration, once leagues and teams start co-signing on these things, and once you have to filter these messages through this corporate lens. So here go the Boston Celtics saying, knowing protesters in our nation's capital are treated differently by political leaders depending on what side of certain issues they're on. And I submit humbly that the difference is not whether or not they're on the same side of the issue. The difference is that these rioters were white instead of Black protesters, because I promise you, if you manage to round up 1,000 Black Donald Trump supporters and send them into the Capitol, past police barricades, do you think they get escorted down the steps politely, or do you think they get run out of there violently?
Well, I would only say that, and I did a big interview this morning with someone who was down there in the middle of it, recording and whatnot. And you have to say that it's both. Of course, they're being treated in a certain way because they're white. And, you know, as Joe Scarborough said this morning, if who's not exactly, you know, Mr. Liberal, if they're black, if they're Muslim, it's an entirely different story. But it's also true that you have a lot of police officers who are sympathetic to what they're doing. I mean, it's true that there has been an infiltration of the police by white supremacists. That's not me saying this from a conspiracy land. That's reports from the FBI talking about the threat of white supremacism in this country. I mean, when you see police officers not merely rolling their eyes and saying, yeah, fine, you can rampage because you're white, but actually taking selfies with people, actually pulling away barricades so people can run through, actually holding the door open for people. I mean, you see that this is more complicated than strictly a question of pure white privilege. It's also a question of white politics and the way that there is sympathy with those politics inside police departments, and certainly not just in Washington, D.C.
Let's put it in perspective, Morgan and Dave. Dave and I could literally walk side by side with masks on to the state capitol. He would be able to breach the barricade, probably get near the steps. The reality is, I'm probably getting tackled to the ground before I even reach the barricade. That is the difference in two Americas for a white person and a black person, or any minority and a white person. And when you have it on national television, because this was on national television, not just for the US to see, not just for Canada to see, but for the world to see. We saw different other country leaders pouring in their thoughts to what they were witnessing at 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, when this was happening at 2, 3, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is the reality. And, you know, you look at social media when all this is going on and you see two different Americas as well. You see the minority America where they are breaking down saying, why are you surprised or shocked that this is happening? This has been the lead up of the past 4.5 years of this presidency, especially the past 2 months of all the conspiracies and the election steal, misinformation that's been put out there. And then you see the side that is appalled and shocked as to what is happening. You live in two different Americas. Everybody does. And yesterday was the epitome and the definition of what white privilege is. And it was on television for the entire world to see. And this is exactly what the athletes of the NBA, the WNBA, Major League Baseball, and the NFL have been consistently trying to get across. Colin Kaepernick took a knee 4 years ago because of injustices, and we saw it on full display on national television across the world. As my shirt says, do you understand now?
Well, exactly. And I don't know that you can, and you absolutely can't disentangle the white privilege from the white politics of it all. When you think about Donald Trump last week or whenever it was, and again, it feels like a month ago, calling the Secretary of State in Georgia saying, hey, why don't you find me 11,800 votes? Like, this is the type of thing mayors of mid-sized to large cities in the US go to jail for all the time. Like, how is that different from Kwame Kilpatrick texting with his girlfriend in Detroit saying, hey, it's time to fire Gary Brown? Listen, you text that, you're going to jail. That's the city cell phone. It's time to go to prison. And this is what happens. Yet Donald Trump walks away with it. Lindsey Graham called the Republican senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, called the Georgia Secretary of State saying something similar. Hey, why don't you just find us enough votes so that Donald Trump can win the state? But it's the whiteness and the power and the privilege that all work together to allow these people to do this and feel like they're not going to get in trouble for it. So Meghan, yesterday, and for the audience that don't know this, like Meghan and I, we text each other, usually about 90 Day Fiance, but often about basketball. And Meghan sent me a link to LeBron James's tweet saying, hey, I want to put together an ownership group to buy the Atlanta Dream. And it's funny, Dave, you were talking about pro athletes having to fill these voids that political leaders leave. And LeBron James is one of the great void fillers of our time. When he's rightly celebrated for bankrolling all of these kids college education in his hometown of Akron, Ohio. And he's rightly celebrated for going into his own pocket to set up polling places in Los Angeles. And he should be celebrated for that. But then the question is, why should he have to do that? Why should he have to bankroll it personally? But he is a void filler. So now that LeBron James says, I wouldn't mind buying the Atlanta Dream. And the original conversation before all this other stuff happened was between me and Meghan, neither of us knowing how much a WNBA franchise is worth. And we were trying to figure out if LeBron James could buy a WNBA franchise for his lunch money, or would it cost him his coffee money? But all of that aside, how do we feel about LeBron James or someone like him buying the Atlanta Dream, Meghan?
I support
it. Sorry, go ahead, Meghan.
Sorry, we also saw, Baron Davis had put out when you go back to the summer when the whole stuff with former Senator Loeffler began with the Atlanta Dream and the WNBA, Baron Davis was on board with wanting to get an ownership group together. And what we didn't know behind the scenes is that the ball had been rolling and has been rolling for the Brock and the Loeffler family, which are the two of the groups that own the Atlanta Dream. They already began the wheels turning to sell the franchise. And it has been reported, and it was reported on Wednesday. So that's something that's already been in motion. It's just trying to find the right group, because that's important. Obviously, we have seen what has transpired with Kelly Loeffler and her ownership stake. That's a whole other, conversation. But I would love to see more former players get into ownership, whether it's, men and women coming together or an all women's group like we saw with the Los Angeles soccer team. Either way, I think it's great for the sport, because you're now seeing athletes giving back to the sport that gave them so much. So I'm completely on board for athletes wanting to get into ownership. Richard Sherman is an active NFL player, has an ownership stake in an NBA team. I imagine there's probably something in the CBA for NBA, WNBA players that are currently active with being part of ownership. I imagine it's probably not allowed, but upon retirement, I know Diana Taurasi has said she wants to get into ownership. Renee Montgomery, who plays for the Atlanta Dream and opted out this past WNBA season to focus on social justice and racial injustices as well too. So I am 1000% for athletes when they retire to get into ownership, because I think it's perfect.
Yeah, it is. It's strange, Meghan, and it's like, I'm a big boxing fan, but as crooked as that business is, the one thing boxing does allow, if you're a big enough star, if you are in the boxing world, what LeBron James is in the basketball world, is it does allow you to make enough money to go into business by yourself. If you're Floyd Mayweather, if you're Canelo Alvarez, if you are even like the second level stars, Ryan Garcia, Javante Davis, to become their own promoters and start to take some ownership over the direction of their own careers that athletes in mainstream sports don't always have. But Dave, what was your reaction when you found out that LeBron James, and now Mookie Betts also is tweeting he wants him, that these well-established and deep-pocketed mainstream men's pro athletes are interested in owning a WNBA team?
I mean, I was hoping that LeBron James would buy it and then gift shares of it to families who've lost members to police violence. Mm-hmm. And what a tribute, or should I say, what a monument that would be to the post Kelly Loeffler era. Because, we got to remember what the Atlanta Dream players and other WNBA players found so repugnant about Kelly mm-hmm. Loeffler. She was essentially using WNBA players like they were Sister Souljah with a jump shot, that they were the people who were part of the problem in this country because they said that Black lives should matter, because they used their political voices. She literally decided to demagogue and run for Senate on the idea that her own players were part of the problem in this country, not police violence, not the injustices they were speaking out against, but her players. And when Renee Montgomery asked to meet with Kelly Loeffler just to speak to her, that meeting was denied. That meeting did not happen. Renee Montgomery, how would you not want to talk to Renee Montgomery, one of the sharpest knives in any box she happens to be in, and Kelly Loeffler wouldn't talk to her. So I think there needs to be almost like a monument to the post-Loeffler era about what the WNBA stands for, because the WNBA says all the time that, we stand for more than basketball. They even have t-shirts to that effect, and I would love to see someone like LeBron James, who could purchase a franchise for probably minimal money relative to his net worth and say, you know what, a section of this is going to go to the family of George Floyd. A section of this is going to go to the family of Jordan Davis, you know, who was killed in Georgia by someone who didn't like how loud his music was playing. A section of this money will go to the family of Ahmaud Arbery, who was, of course, killed in Georgia. Of course, I'm not in the business of telling LeBron or anybody what to do with their money. That's his business. But I just would love the idea of not having it just be owner to owner, but a real statement saying, you know, the kind of ownership that was represented here in Atlanta, that's just not what we're about. Not anymore.
Yes, well, absolutely. And here's what I love about the idea, right? Is that when we talk about the WNBA, the league is about a quarter of a century old. It's not the NBA in terms of size and prestige and revenue. It's not the NFL. And this is, you know, a constant debate when we talk about how WNBA players are underpaid. And then the counter argument is, well, they don't bring as much revenue as men's teams. Okay, we get it. But the type of ownership I like to see in leagues like this that are still growing is comfortably, independently rich, doing something else. So if I buy this WNBA team, I don't need this WNBA team to make money. I can invest in this WNBA team over the long term. I don't need to turn a profit year one. So I'm not going to do all the short-sighted, crooked stuff that people do when they need to turn a profit year one. I'm not going to skimp on how I take care of the players on this team because the players give the team value. I'm not going to suppress salaries. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to pay people what they're worth, and I'm going to take care of them off the court because I want this product to grow. And LeBron James and Mookie Bettses of the world, they're positioned to do that because they don't need the Atlanta. If they own the Atlanta Dream, they don't need the Atlanta Dream to make money. Like the Atlanta Dream, making money is not the difference between LeBron James paying his mortgage and LeBron James not paying his mortgage. But the only problem I have with this is similar to the Donald Sterling problem, is that this is a form of extortion, right? Where Kelly Loeffler is a part owner of this team and she makes herself such a big nuisance, such a big problem, such a big dilemma that you have to pay a premium to get her out of the way. Like Donald Sterling, I don't know what the percentage profit he made selling the LA Clippers. Like Steve Ballmer paid a premium to get Donald Sterling out of the way. And what we know about Kelly Loeffler is that she is very experienced in this type of grift. And so now here she is. She's positioned herself. She has said, hey, nice team here. It would be a shame if something happened to it. And now some owner looking to save this team from itself, it has to come cut the check. Go ahead, Dave.
Just real quick, that Kelly Loeffler was very famous in Republican circles before being appointed to the Senate for, in private rooms, railing against Republican officials that they were too right-wing. You know, and that was who she was. And then as soon as, you know, she becomes someone who gives Donald Trump all this money so she can get the Senate seat, all of a sudden she's doing commercials against the Black Lives Matter movement and saying, and this is a quote, that I'm to the right of Genghis Khan. So she flipped her script really hard. And then you saw her true colors last night. She had pledged to vote to decertify the votes.
Yes.
And then when the lights were on, post all the carnage, and you know, and knows she's not going to be a senator anymore, and she has to think about what her life's going to be like when she leaves Georgia. And make no mistake, she's going to be on the first plane out of Georgia back to Chicago. I believe that's where she's from. She's she backtracked on all of that, knowing that she's not going to get invited to any of the parties otherwise. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it is a form of extortion. Donald Sterling certainly played that from a financial perspective as well as possible. But at the same time, I think getting her out of the league is a priority.
Well, absolutely. And so, and again, it just, on a personal level, it just bothers me that she can profit off of having damaged and sabotaged. But again, what she is doing is not different from what so many of these Republican senators were doing Wednesday night in this effort to rehabilitate their image. Here comes Mitch McConnell with this declaration that democracy survived this coup attempt. And here comes Mitch McConnell and trying to position himself as the person that saves democracy from the mob when he has done more than anyone to obstruct and delay and undercut and kneecap democracy. So my question, Meghan, is like, where does the WNBA go from here in terms of trying to like parlay this? Because it's kind of going backwards for the WNBA, right? Usually we talk about athletes being really famous and then flexing those muscles in the social realm. Here's the WNBA, a relatively minor pro sports league compared to the big three, but has an outsized influence on this election. How do they parlay that momentum back into their upcoming season?
I think they continue doing what they've been doing and what they've been doing for years. I mean, this what we saw this summer with the Atlanta Dream taking a stand against an owner and doing, let's be very clear, the players of the WNBA did not just wake up and say, we're gonna support Raphael Warnock. They did their research. They educated themselves. They found out who all the candidates were, and they decided as a united front which candidate they would support with the 144 and extras, because let's be real, there's 144 that were active players, but there are hundreds more who are not playing in the league, have opted out of the league, what have you. They made a collected, united decision that they would support Raphael Warnock and put all of their power behind him. They educated themselves. These women are educated and intelligent humans, and they did the right thing. And I imagine, and I know they will continue to do the right thing when it comes to what they do to move their voices forward, to move their message forward, and to continue to move the league forward. They will educate themselves. They will make sure that they are the most educated person in the conversation. And if they are not, they will make sure that they have people on their side and in their corner to assist them in making the best decision. They reached out to people within the political realm to get some insight. They made sure that they had everything that they would need on their notepad so that when they made the decision, they were going to get these Vote Warnock shirts. It was the right decision, not only for them, but for the citizens and the folks of Georgia. They made a concerted effort as a united front. And that is the key thing about the WNBA. They are always united as one. It is not one and a few extras. It is always 144 and move forward.
Yeah, well, that's also the beauty of the WNBA is that, one, again, the complaint is they don't make as much money as the men. That's why we shouldn't pay them. Okay, cool. But the upside of that is, again, that the players can act this way and not have like a Vote Warnock message, again, filtered through this corporate lens to say, just vote anyone. All votes matter. No, this is a specific message we're trying to send in a specific race. It's going to have national implications. But Dave, what are you looking for when you think of, again, how athlete activism is going to unfold in 2021, especially given the fact that everyone's trying to get back to a normalish schedule? How do you think these dynamics will interact?
Well, I think it's going to depend on what happens in the streets, which is very difficult in the context of a pandemic. I don't want to name the name, but I read a rather dispirited column from talking about where are the athlete activists? You know, the police killings haven't stopped. Where are they? Where are they? And I just think that's the wrong approach times 1,000. You know, if we're looking for athletes to somehow do this for us, then I think we're being very ignorant about how this has always worked historically. Like historically, athletes have been a reflection of what's happening in popular consciousness, a reflection of what's happening in the streets. And then athletes have shown that they can be great amplifiers for what's taking place in terms of consciousness and what's happening in the streets. And they also can in turn shape what's happening in the streets. They can be actors who shape what is taking place in front of us. But the idea that they will do it in a vacuum is wrong. And the idea that we should expect them to do it in a vacuum is wrong. And it's a complicated question right now because of the pandemic, makes it very difficult for people to protest because of all kinds of factors of how people are feeling right now. It's very difficult to generate the kind of heat that athletes will respond to. But I think we're still going to see people like Jaylen Brown, people who have been, there's no other word for it, truly radicalized by what's taken place over the last several years, as well as this entire generation of athletes who I think of as being almost like the children of Kaepernick, like people who are 21, 22 years old, who were teenagers when he first took that knee. And I've always taken it as an article of faith that he did the right thing. That in and of itself is not going anywhere.
Absolutely, Dave. And you said the right word, radicalized, but radicalized in a good way. People who go out looking for and not afraid to get into what John Lewis called good trouble, necessary trouble.
It's a good word to me.
Perfect. Listen, big thanks to Dave and Meghan for making time to do this on one of the busiest days of the year, one of the most chaotic days of the year. Dave's in Washington, D.C., sports editor of The Nation. Meghan is in Washington, D.C., but calls Hamilton, Ontario home, play-by-play person all over the basketball world, but right now for the capital city Go-Go and the Washington Mystics. I'm Morgan Campbell in Toronto. This has been another week of Bring It In with Morgan Campbell. We will see you guys really soon.